The rain came down in sheets, hammering the cracked pavement of a quiet Chicago side street. The city seemed to shrink under the storm, streetlights blurred into streaks of gold, car tires hissed over wet asphalt, and the usual hum of traffic had turned into an angry roar. Amid the chaos, a man moved cautiously along the curb, shoulders hunched, collar up, hood pulled tight. He was Jack Mercer, a veteran who had survived wars abroad only to feel like a casualty at home. Every step splashed in puddles, sending cold water up his threadbare boots. His trench coat, more patched than fabric, flapped in the wind, and in his right hand he clutched the leash of Rex, a German shepherd whose fur was matted and dirty, one ear nicked and scarred from a battlefield Jack rarely mentioned. Jack was invisible. To the world he had always been invisible. People either glanced at him and turned away or crossed to the other side of the street, muttering under their breath about another bum or homeless vets. He had learned long ago not to expect anything from strangers. No smiles, no assistance, no recognition. Every kind word he remembered came from letters that never arrived, from friends whose faces had blurred with time, or from the loyalty of Rex, who never judged, never abandoned. But tonight, as he trudged along the street, the rain-slicked road betrayed something unusual, a flash of white out of the corner of his eye. Rex stopped suddenly, muscles taut, growling low in his throat. Jack froze, squinting through the rain. There by the curb was a wheelchair, tipped slightly sideways as water pooled around its wheels. A figure leaned into it, trying desperately to right the chair, long hair plastered to a veil that clung to her soaked shoulders. The rain wasn't just falling, it was hammering. Every drop felt like a tiny slap on her face. Jack noticed her hands trembling, fingers digging into the cold, wet metal, trying to maintain balance. Her head tilted back briefly, mascara running streaks down her cheeks, and she looked around frantically as if expecting someone, anyone, to stop. No one did. Cars roared past, tires throwing up sheets of water. A black SUV honked aggressively, its driver shouting something incomprehensible through rolled-up windows. The bride flinched, panic flickering in her wide, terrified eyes. Jack felt a pulse of recognition, not because he knew her but because he knew that fear. He had felt it countless times in dusty deserts and distant villages, where life could be stolen in a heartbeat. And now it was right here in the middle of his city. He hesitated. Helping would mean getting involved, drawing attention to himself, and Jack had long ago perfected the art of being invisible. But Rex had already lunged forward, teeth gripping the strap of the wheelchair like a lifeline. Jack's instincts kicked in. He couldn't let his dog face danger alone. Boots sloshing in water, Jack ran, grabbed the wheelchair frame with hands numb from cold and braced against the current of storm water racing along the curb. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar of rain and traffic. "I've got you." The bride's eyes met his, shock, confusion, terror, and a glimmer of hope all at once. She didn't speak, couldn't speak. Her arms shook as she tried to stabilize herself. The wheelchair tipped dangerously again, and in a heartbeat, Jack felt it slipping from his grasp. He lunged, gripping it tighter. Rex barked, tugging at the strap, anchoring it with uncanny strength. "Easy, easy," Jack said, voice low but commanding. "I've got you." Time seemed to stretch. The water surged. For a second everything slowed, the flash of white veil against dark asphalt, the glint of raindrops on Jack's boots, Rex's taut muscles straining. And then chaos. The chair lurched again, Jack's footing betrayed him, and he slipped, cold water rushing over his legs. Panic stabbed him, sharp and immediate, as he realized the danger wasn't abstract. The wheelchair could tip, she could fall, they could all be swept under the storm drain's current. But Jack's body reacted before thought. He threw himself sideways, leveraging his weight to hold the chair, his palms blistering on metal. Rex barked continuously, circling the wheelchair to brace it, ears flattened, eyes focused. The bride screamed, not loudly, but the sound cut through the storm like a knife. Jack gritted his teeth and held on, muscles screaming, heart pounding in a rhythm he had only ever heard in war zones. Finally, after what felt like an eternity compressed into seconds, Jack managed to anchor the wheelchair against a raised curb. Rex dropped the strap, panting, fur matted and soaked, but eyes still vigilant. The bride trembled violently, wet hair plastered to her cheeks. Jack reached for a scrap of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. You didn't have to," she whispered, voice barely audible over the rain. Jack forced a lopsided smile. "Yeah, I did," he said simply. For a moment, silence fell, punctuated only by the splashes of passing cars and the rhythmic hiss of rain. Jack could see the fear in her eyes slowly replaced by gratitude. And then, something else. A flicker of curiosity, almost like she was trying to read him, to understand this man who had risked himself without a second thought. Jack's ears pricked at a sound, tires screeching, a sharp cough of exhaust, and he turned. A limousine had stopped a few yards away. Its headlights cut across the wet street, reflecting off puddles in long, jagged lines. The back window rolled down, and for a heartbeat, Jack thought he was about to be scolded or threatened. Instead, he saw a figure inside, leaning forward, eyes wide, observing him, observing everything. The eyes held recognition, though Jack didn't know it yet. The limo's door opened slowly, but the figure stayed inside. Jack felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Something about the moment carried weight, like a quiet warning, a prelude. He glanced back at the bride. She was soaked, hands still gripping the wheelchair, trembling. Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, voice quivering. "I think so, thanks to you." Jack just grunted. He didn't need thanks, didn't need attention. He was used to the rain, the wind, the cold, the endless nights without warmth or shelter. Gratitude was foreign, yet he could feel it pressing on him, soft but insistent, like an unfamiliar weight in his chest. Rex nudged his hand, reminding him they weren't out of danger yet. Jack looked back at the limo. The figure inside had vanished. No one else had stopped. The street was empty again, save for the storm, the water, the debris, and the three of them, man, dog, and bride. Jack didn't realize it yet, but in this moment the world had already changed. A single act of instinct, of compassion, had set events into motion that would ripple through lives, change fortunes, and test hearts. But he couldn't know that. He only knew the rain, the cold, the slippery pavement, and the weight of the chair in his hands. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt seen. Then Rex barked, loud, sharp, insistent. Jack turned his head. Something moved in the shadows down the street. He couldn't tell what. For a split second, the world felt larger, heavier, alive with unseen eyes. Jack tightened his grip on the wheelchair. The storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. And somewhere beyond the rain, beyond the flashing city lights, something, or someone, was waiting for what was coming next. The street had transformed into a river in minutes. Rain pounded down, washing trash, leaves, and wetting petals into swirling whirlpools around manhole covers and drains. Jack's boots squelched through puddles, each step sending ripples toward the gutter where the wheelchair teetered dangerously. Rex's hackles were up, ears flat against his head, eyes trained like a sniper, on the sudden turbulence around the wheels. Jack crouched beside the chair, hands gripping the metal frame. The bride's face was pale, mascara streaks running into the soaked lace of her veil. Her fingers fumbled over the handles, trying to regain control, but water gushed under the chair and threatened to sweep it sideways. The storm wasn't just a storm. It was a force of nature, testing him, testing them, testing her. "Hold still," Jack shouted over the roar, but the words were drowned by the pounding rain. She shook her head, trembling. I can't, it's too strong. I'm going to." Before she could finish, the chair lurched violently, wheels spinning on the slick pavement. A surge of water hit Jack's chest, cold, biting, and unforgiving. His heart slammed in his chest, every beat screaming danger. He braced his boots against the curb, muscles straining, sweat and rain mixing into a river of fatigue down his back. Rex lunged, jaws clamping on the strap of the wheelchair, pulling with raw strength that startled even Jack. Jack's mind flashed back to Afghanistan. the dry, dusty streets of Kandahar when his squad was trapped, pinned down by gunfire, and the only way to survive was to act fast, to trust instincts. He didn't hesitate. He shoved forward, using all his weight to counter the chair's tipping, one hand gripping the frame, the other steadying the bride's shoulder. For a moment, time slowed. He saw the rain-slick street, the chair, the terrified eyes of the woman, the muscles of Rex taut with effort. Every detail burned into his memory like a snapshot. Then the chair tilted again, dangerously. "Rex, hold," Jack barked. The dog responded, pulling the strap with every ounce of his strength. Jack's boots slipped in a deeper puddle. Cold water surged into his socks, numbing his toes. Panic flickered, but he swallowed it, forcing himself to focus. If the chair tipped now, if she fell into the water. No, not on his watch. With a grunt that pulled at every fiber of his back, Jack swung the wheelchair toward the raised sidewalk curb. Rain dripped from his hair, blurring vision, blinding him, but he didn't let go. His hands burned from gripping wet metal and his lungs screamed for air, but still he held. "Almost there," he muttered, not caring if she could hear him. It wasn't words, it was reassurance, a promise that he wasn't going to let her go. Finally, with a last surge of effort, he leveraged the chair onto the sidewalk. It wobbled precariously but stayed upright. The bride collapsed into it, shivering, hands clutching the frame, tears mixing with the rain. Rex pressed his wet snout against her knee, tail wagging weakly but insistently, offering comfort without understanding the gravity of the danger she had faced. Jack dropped beside them, chest heaving, soaked to the bone. "You okay?" he asked, voice hoarse. She nodded shakily, barely able to speak. I think so, thanks to you." Jack didn't smile, didn't offer the expected platitude. "Yeah, I did." The words were simple, true, necessary. She studied him for a moment, her wet hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with a mixture of fear, gratitude, and curiosity. Why did you help me?" Jack looked at her, at the soaked wedding gown clinging to her like a second skin, at the trembling hands gripping the wheelchair. He saw someone terrified, alone, and in need. "Because I couldn't not," he said simply. "Because your life mattered, even if no one else sees it." She swallowed hard, tears slipping down her cheeks. No one helps anyone anymore," she whispered. Jack looked at her, and for a split second he felt something familiar in her words. The same hollow ache he had carried since leaving the army, the same feeling of invisibility he had lived with every day on the streets. And then Rex growled, low warning. Jack's eyes followed the dog's gaze. A black SUV had pulled up at the end of the street, tires hissing against wet asphalt. The door opened, and a man stepped out in a dark suit, looking around like he was scanning a battlefield. His eyes widened when he saw Jack holding the wheelchair, wet coat clinging to his frame, hands gripping metal like a lifeline. The man froze, then whispered something into a phone. Jack didn't hear it, but the urgency in the man's posture was unmistakable. The bride's voice trembled. Who are they?" Jack shook his head. He had no idea. "Doesn't matter, just stay calm." The SUV doors opened again. More men in suits, rain slicked and impatient. Jack felt the familiar surge of tension, the one that always preceded confrontation, the one that made adrenaline spike and muscles tense. He edged the chair closer to the curb, instinctively shielding her. One of the men finally approached, voice steady but urgent. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The bride nodded, though she still trembled. Jack noted the relief in her eyes, fleeting and fragile. But then the man's tone shifted. "Sir, do you know who she is?" Jack froze. The question wasn't rhetorical. He had no clue. But there was something in the man's gaze, a mixture of awe, panic, and disbelief, that made him suddenly aware of gravity he couldn't yet comprehend. She's my responsibility now," the man added, more to himself than to Jack. The bride said nothing, but her hands tightened on the wheelchair armrests. She didn't need to speak. Jack sensed her fear, confusion, and gratitude all at once. And then a voice cut through the storm, a quiet, commanding whisper that made Jack's chest tighten. "Thank you." He looked at her. She was soaked, pale, fragile, and yet there was a fire in her eyes that refused to be extinguished by rain, by fear, or by the chaos surrounding them. For the first time in years, Jack felt it, the weight of significance. Someone had been vulnerable, and he had mattered. It was a dangerous, exhilarating feeling, like stepping off a cliff and realizing you could fly. Rex pressed his head against Jack's leg. Jack patted him, heart still racing, lungs still burning. The storm continued, relentless, and yet, in that moment, a fragile, tenuous peace had settled. Then movement at the edge of the street caught his eye. Another figure, this one taller, more deliberate, stepping out of the shadows of the SUVs. Jack's instincts flared. Not just anyone approached in this storm. Someone meant business. The bride's voice trembled again. I don't know what to say." Jack looked at her. He didn't answer. He simply tightened his grip on the wheelchair, eyes scanning the street, muscles coiled like springs. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen by him, someone, or something, was already calculating the next move. Jack Mercer had saved her from the storm, from the water, from falling. But he had no idea the storm that mattered most was just beginning. Because no act of courage, no matter how instinctive or selfless, existed in a vacuum. And what they had survived together was about to change everything. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, leaving the street glistening under the flickering yellow glow of broken streetlights. Jack Mercer leaned against the curb, drenched to the bone, muscles trembling from the adrenaline still coursing through his body. Rex, ever vigilant, sat close, ears perked, head cocked toward every movement in the shadows. The bride's wheelchair rested safely on the raised sidewalk, wheels spinning in shallow puddles, her trembling fingers clutching the armrests like a lifeline. Jack exhaled, his chest heaving. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a brief sense of accomplishment. She was safe, alive, that was enough. But then something caught his eye, something small yet unmistakable. Her left hand. Jack noticed it because it didn't sparkle. There was no ring glinting on the fourth finger, no symbol of a bond or promise. Just bare skin, pale against the darkened lace of her gloves. He frowned. "You don't have a ring," he said quietly. She looked down at her hand, fingers curling slightly. Her lips trembled as she exhaled. "I lost it," she admitted. "Or maybe it was never meant to be." Jack studied her. She wasn't just a bride drenched in rain. She was a woman abandoned in the most public, humiliating way possible. Her chest heaved with suppressed sobs, shoulders hunched under the weight of disappointment, shame, and fear. "You okay?" he asked, more gently this time, aware that words mattered more than usual. I think so," she said, voice cracking. She looked up at him, eyes wide, haunted, and yet fiercely alive. This isn't how today was supposed to go." Jack didn't respond. He understood the weight of expectations, of plans shattered, of life refusing to follow the script you spent years writing. He'd lived it. Afghanistan had taught him that control was a lie, and the streets of Chicago had reinforced it. Rex nudged her knee with his wet snout, tail wagging weakly as if to say, "It's okay. You're safe now." She laughed softly, a small, broken sound, before suddenly starting to cry. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with rain, washing mascara into streaks of despair. "My fiancé, he left me," she confessed between shudders. "Right before the ceremony, said he didn't sign up for a life like mine." Jack's jaw tightened. Anger and disgust rose simultaneously at the injustice, at the cruelty, at the emptiness of human selfishness. He had seen enough betrayal, enough abandonment to recognize it immediately. "His loss," he said simply. The words were sharp, final, but there was no judgment in them, just truth. She looked at him then, really looked, eyes searching his, reading every scar, every crease, every hint of pain and resilience in his expression. "You're not like the others," she whispered. Jack didn't reply. Words felt inadequate. He'd spent too long hiding, too long observing humanity from the sidelines, to trust that anyone could understand him. Then movement at the end of the street drew his attention. The black SUVs from before were still there, doors opening, men stepping out with expressions of urgency and authority. One of them froze mid-step when he saw Jack holding the wheelchair steady. "Sir, do you know who she is?" the man asked, voice trembling slightly. Jack blinked. "No," he said honestly, "I just helped her, that's it." The man's eyes widened, disbelief and shock mingling in equal measure. She's Eleanor Whitmore," he stammered. "The Eleanor Whitmore." Jack frowned. The name meant nothing to him. Wealth, fame, titles, they were meaningless to someone used to being invisible. Yet the gravity in the man's tone made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "She's the youngest billionaire in the country," the man whispered, as though speaking louder would shatter reality itself. "CEO of Whitmore Industries. She could have been anyone, anybody at all, but you saved her." Jack's gaze shifted back to the bride. Eleanor, that was her name. It didn't fit the image the man had painted. She was soaked, trembling, pale, fragile in a wheelchair. But beneath that vulnerability there was something else, a spark, a quiet, stubborn fire. Eleanor met his gaze, eyes steady despite her shivering. "Please, don't treat me differently now," she said. Jack felt a pang of something unfamiliar, an uncomfortable awareness that his life had just intersected with someone whose world was almost unthinkably larger than his own. He wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that he wasn't interested in wealth or influence, that the streets had taught him to survive without expecting kindness from strangers. But before he could speak, one of the men from the SUV stepped closer, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, the board, the media, they've been searching for you since the limo was stopped. Your location, this video, it's already gone viral." Jack glanced around. He saw it now. A few scattered phone flashes from the edge of the street, capturing fragments of the scene. The rain blurred the images, but the essence, the man, the dog, the chair, the bride struggling against the water, was unmistakable. Eleanor's breath hitched, a mixture of shock and realization. She looked at Jack, incredulous. They were filming. Jack shrugged. "Some people never do anything unless there's a camera. Doesn't mean it's real." But it was real. Every detail, every second, every instinctive movement had been captured. Every viral share, every comment, every like would soon amplify the story of what just happened. A homeless veteran and his dog saving a bride from a storm. Jack felt a familiar weight settle over him, the weight of attention, of exposure, of potential danger. The streets had taught him that notoriety rarely ended well. And yet Eleanor wasn't focused on the fame. Her gaze remained on him, searching, studying, assessing. "You didn't know who I was, and yet you didn't hesitate." Jack shook his head, a dry laugh escaping. "I've seen worse than rain, trust me." Her lips curved in a faint, grateful smile. You really saved me." Before Jack could respond, one of the men in the suits whispered to another, clearly awed. "Do you realize what just happened? He saved Eleanor Whitmore without knowing it, without expecting anything in return." The words hung in the air. Jack didn't care about the meaning, the recognition, the attention. What mattered was the moment, her safety, Rex's steadfast loyalty, the fleeting connection between two strangers whose worlds were otherwise unconnected. Eleanor exhaled, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "I don't even know your name," she said softly. "Jack," he replied. "Jack Mercer, and this is Rex." He gestured to the German shepherd who sat obediently by his side, fur matted, eyes alert, tail still wagging faintly despite exhaustion. "Jack and Rex," she repeated, the syllables tasting unfamiliar but warm. I owe you more than I can say." Jack's lips tightened. He had no interest in debt or gratitude. He lived in a world where promises were broken, where loyalty was rare, and kindness was often punished. But something about the way she said it, the quiet sincerity in her voice, stirred a part of him long buried under years of abandonment and pain. Then suddenly, a gust of wind swept down the street, scattering trash and loose petals into a vortex around them. The SUV's headlights cut through the haze, and a pair of black leather shoes appeared at the edge of the sidewalk. A man in a tailored suit, wet and slightly disheveled, stepped forward, holding out his hand, not in threat but in urgent necessity. "Ma'am, we need to get you somewhere safe," he said, glancing nervously at Jack. Alina shook her head. "No, not yet." She looked at Jack, eyes unwavering. "He's not done helping me, not yet." Jack's stomach tightened. That simple statement, spoken by someone who had every right to expect obedience, made him aware that their connection, fragile as it was, had shifted something profound. Something dangerous. Something unstoppable. Rex barked softly, sensing Jack's tension. Jack nodded to the dog, bracing himself. Whatever came next, whatever storm approached, they were ready to face it, together. And somewhere in the shadow of the street, unseen but present, another force began to move, watching, waiting, calculating. Jack had saved the bride from the water, but the currents of the world had only just begun to pull them forward. For now, though, in the quiet aftermath of terror and rain, Jack, Rex, and the bride sat together on a wet curb, breathing in the storm's fatting rhythm. They had survived. But survival, Jack knew, was only the beginning. And Alina Whitmore, so fragile, so human, so unexpectedly alive, was about to change everything he thought he knew about the world. The drizzle softened to a mist, wrapping the street in a cold, gray haze. Streetlights shimmered on puddles, casting fractured reflections of neon signs and wet asphalt. Jack Mercer's coat clung to him, soaked through, and Rex rested at his side, muscles still tense, tail swishing in tiny, nervous arcs. For a moment, it seemed like the storm had finally passed, but something in the air told Jack it wasn't over. The black SUVs had not moved. Their dark silhouettes pressed against the street like sentinels, too clean, too deliberate, too unyielding in their presence. One of the men in a tailored suit finally approached Jack, his expression a mix of awe and cautious authority. "Sir, do you know who she is?" the man asked again, voice low, almost reverent. Jack frowned. "No," he said, his eyes narrowed. "I don't, and frankly, I don't care." The man's reaction was instantaneous, a sharp intake of breath, eyes widening. "You have no idea," he whispered. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Jack raised an eyebrow, tired, skeptical. "I saved someone from getting hurt, that's it." "No," the man said, shaking his head as if trying to shake out the impossible truth. He spoke faster now, words spilling over each other. She's Alina Whitmore, Whitmore Industries, billionaire. Youngest CEO in history. She could have been anyone in that car. Anyone, and you saved her." Jack blinked. For a moment nothing registered. Billionaire, CEO. Titles floated through his mind like meaningless confetti. To him, all of that was irrelevant. He lived in streets that didn't care about net worth or power. But the intensity in the man's voice, the way he repeated the name as though it carried sacred weight, made Jack pause. "Alina Whitmore," he repeated slowly, tasting the syllables. The name sounded foreign, dangerous, significant. The bride herself, still shivering, turned toward him. Her face, streaked with tears and rain, was simultaneously exhausted and defiant. "Please," she said softly, almost pleading, "don't make this bigger than it already is." Jack shook his head. "I don't care who you are," he said, voice low, steady. "I just didn't want you to fall." Rex growled low in his throat, warning of approaching footsteps. Jack turned to see the tall man from the SUV gesturing urgently. "Ma'am, we need to move," he said. His tone had shifted from awe to command. "The press, your board, your legal team, they're already mobilized. Your safety is complicated." Alina looked at Jack, lips parting as if to say something, then hesitated. She glanced at the SUVs, the rain-slick street, then back at him. There was a quiet acknowledgement in her gaze, a recognition that transcended wealth and titles. I want him with me," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm, carrying authority in a way Jack didn't expect. "He saved me. He matters right now." Jack's stomach tightened. He knew better than to expect gratitude from strangers. He knew the world wouldn't simply accept someone like him in their high-stakes, high-powered bubble. And yet her words, her insistence, made him pause. The man in the suit glanced at Alina, surprised. "Ma'am, he's a homeless veteran." Jack stiffened. Homeless. Veteran. Both labels carried weight in ways the world misunderstood. He wasn't a charity case. He wasn't a hero in the conventional sense. He was a survivor, and he had no interest in celebrity or money. Alina tilted her head, meeting his eyes. "I don't care. I want him there. And the dog, they're part of this story." Jack looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail slightly, head tilted as though he understood the gravity of the moment. Jack exhaled, a slow, steadying breath. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't expected it, and certainly hadn't wanted it, but Alina's insistence carried an unspoken promise. She wouldn't exploit him. Not yet. The street was quiet now except for the drizzle and the distant hum of traffic. Jack lifted the wheelchair slightly, guiding Alina toward the curb. She leaned into the motion, careful, shivering, yet somehow unbroken. There was an undeniable strength in her posture despite the storm, a defiance that matched his own internal wariness. As they moved, the man in the suit caught up. "Ma'am, this is highly irregular. You can't just bring him along." Alina's eyes narrowed. "He saved my life. That changes everything." Jack felt a twinge of unease. The storm had been literal, but now it was figurative. He had rescued a stranger from water and debris, but the currents that followed were far more dangerous. He could feel the invisible tension building around him, the unseen pressure of wealth, power, and expectations closing in. They stopped briefly at a puddle-strewn intersection. Jack glanced around. Cameras, phones. People had started to appear, drawn by flashes of movement and the faint echo of a viral story. Rain-coated umbrellas bobbed in the misty distance. Someone had started filming already. Someone always filmed everything in the city. Alina leaned closer to Jack, voice soft but urgent. "Ignore them. Don't worry about it. Just stay with me, please." Jack's heart thumped. Not from fear, not from physical exertion, but from the unrelenting sense of responsibility. He had always avoided entanglements, always walked away when the world got too loud. But now, the choice was no longer his alone. The man from the SUV stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, if you're leaving with him, we'll need to contain the media, alert security, prepare transportation." Alina waved a hand, cutting him off. "Do it. Make it happen, now." Her gaze returned to Jack. "You don't need to understand it, just trust me." Jack hesitated. Trust. A foreign concept. His life had been a series of betrayals, abandonments, and unseen sacrifices. And yet there was something in her eyes, something compelling, that made him nod slowly. "All right," he said finally, "but I make my own rules." Alina smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and respect. "Fair enough." Rex barked softly, as if in agreement, and Jack guided Alina down the sidewalk, the drizzle turning to mist, the street stretching ahead like a bridge into the unknown. Every step carried weight. Every glance over his shoulder hinted at danger, at curiosity, at unseen eyes watching the unlikely trio. And then it happened. A flash from a phone, a click of a camera, and Jack realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm their actions had unleashed. Someone somewhere had already captured the moment. The image, Jack, Rex, and Alina, soaked and victorious, framed by puddles and mist, would spread faster than they could move. Jack's pulse quickened. The attention, the eyes, the world suddenly watching, it wasn't something he was prepared for. But Alina, she seemed calm, almost knowing. She rolled forward, chair steady in Jack's grip, eyes forward, mouth set with determination. "Jack," she said softly, almost a whisper, "you have no idea what just changed." Jack looked at her, confusion mingling with caution. "I can guess," he muttered. "No," she said, voice firmer now, eyes bright with an unspoken fire. "You have no idea." Jack swallowed. Something about her tone, the weight behind it, the certainty. It told him that this was no longer a simple act of rescue. Something far larger, far more dangerous, and far more transformative was beginning. He glanced at Rex, who nudged his hand, tail wagging faintly. Together, they had saved a life. Together, they had stepped into a world neither fully understood, and neither of them could turn back now. Somewhere in the shadows, hidden cameras, agents, and unknown forces waited. The ripple had started. The wave was coming. And for the first time in years, Jack Mercer felt seen. Not just by Billionaire, not just by the small group of witnesses, but by the world. And the world had no idea what it was in for. By dawn, the streets of Chicago were wet, misty, and quiet, but the world had already begun to hum with the echo of what had happened the night before. Jack Mercer sat on a chipped metal bench in a small shelter courtyard, Rex lying at his feet, ears flicking at every distant sound. The dog's fur was still damp from the rain, but his eyes were alert, scanning the horizon as if anticipating more danger. Jack had slept little, muscles aching from adrenaline and tension. The warmth of a dry blanket had been impossible. He had refused the shelter's offers the previous night, preferring the open air. The world had seen him for just a moment, just enough to understand his courage, but he didn't belong in the spotlight, not in any of it. And yet, by morning, the world had already found him. On the shelter's small, flickering television, a news report began to play. Last night, a remarkable act of heroism was captured on video in downtown Chicago. A homeless veteran and his loyal dog saved a bride in distress during a sudden downpour. The bride, identified as Billionaire Whitmore, youngest CEO in American history, was left stranded in the storm. The veteran, Jack Mercer, and his dog, Rex, managed to prevent what could have been a life-threatening accident. Jack's stomach churned. His face, soaked and exhausted, flashed across the screen in slow motion, gripping the wheelchair as Rex anchored it. The rain blurred the footage, but the raw intensity of the moment was undeniable. His hands shook slightly as he watched himself being heralded as a hero, a label he had spent years avoiding. "Figures," muttered one of the older shelter residents, a man named Harry. He leaned over, hands clasped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. "I told you, Jack. Nobody does good without it coming back around, but this is on a whole other level." Jack didn't respond. He felt exposed, vulnerable. The streets had taught him that attention was dangerous. Fame, even unintended, attracted predators. He knew that better than anyone. Across the city, Billionaire Whitmore was staring at the same footage from her penthouse. She sat upright in a cream leather chair, hair damp from the mist she had ignored while overseeing the storm's aftermath. The video played repeatedly on her large screen, each time focusing on Jack's determined expression, the way Rex moved with precision, the raw bravery of someone who hadn't a clue who he was saving, or what the consequences would be. Her assistant hovered nearby. "Ma'am, we should send him a check, a reward, something. He saved your life." Billionaire shook her head slowly. "No," she said firmly. "This isn't about money, not yet. I need to meet him. He doesn't know who I am. And yet he acted without hesitation. That matters more than wealth. That matters more than fame." Back at the shelter, Jack's phone buzzed incessantly. Alerts from social media, news feeds, messages piling in from strangers. Many were congratulatory, a few were condescending, and some were downright cruel, questioning whether the video had been staged. He ignored them all, feeling the familiar tension rise in his chest. His life had always been invisible, and suddenly it was. The eyes of the world were on him, even if he had done nothing to seek them. Rex nudged Jack's hand, sensing his discomfort. The dog's simple loyalty was the only anchor Jack had in this storm of attention. And then came the calls. From numbers he didn't recognize, from blocked lines, from people who didn't introduce themselves, only spoke in urgent tones, asking questions he refused to answer. Jack knew that his world had just become complicated in ways he couldn't yet measure. Meanwhile, Eleanor made a decision. She couldn't wait for Jack to come to her, she had to go to him. Security protocols, corporate procedures, all the layers of protection that surrounded her in her normal life had to be set aside. She needed the man who had saved her life, not just for appearances, not just for media clout, but because she trusted him. Because instinct told her he was different. She arrived at the shelter mid-morning. No cameras, no entourage. Just herself and a simple black umbrella shielding her from the lingering mist. Jack noticed her immediately. Despite her soaked gown from the night before being replaced with casual, elegant clothing, she carried the same aura of authority, tempered by the vulnerability that the storm had revealed. Jack's instinct was to shrink back to avoid attention, to retreat into the protective shell he had built over years of invisibility. But Eleanor's gaze pinned him. It was calm, unthreatening, yet unwavering, as if silently demanding honesty. "You're Jack Mercer," she said softly, walking closer, "and this is Rex." Jack shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to nod or ignore her. "Yeah," he muttered, "that's him, and I guess, yeah, that's me." Eleanor knelt slightly to meet Rex's eyes. "Good boy," she murmured, stroking the dog's head. Rex leaned into her hand, tail wagging faintly. Jack noticed, almost begrudgingly, that the dog had judged her and found her trustworthy. She turned to Jack, voice low and deliberate. "You don't want charity, I understand. I'm not here to offer charity. I want to offer something else, something bigger." Jack frowned. "I don't do favors," he said. "This isn't a favor," Eleanor replied. "It's a choice. You saved me. Now I want to save you, in a way that matters long-term, not just for tonight, not just for appearances, not just to make me look like a hero. I want you and Rex to have something stable, something safe, and I want you to lead the effort." Jack blinked. "Lead the effort? What effort?" Eleanor smiled faintly, a mixture of determination and hope. "Veteran support programs, housing, therapy, dogs, jobs with dignity. You have experience surviving what most people cannot even imagine. You understand what these men and women need, and I want you to help build it, real, effective, permanent support." Jack's chest tightened. Hope was dangerous. Hope was fragile. And yet her words ignited a spark he hadn't felt in years, a recognition that his life, his suffering, and his skills could finally mean something beyond survival. Before he could respond, a small commotion erupted outside the shelter. People had gathered, phones held high, trying to capture the moment. Journalists, bystanders, opportunists. Suddenly, Jack felt the reality of exposure. The viral video hadn't just reached the internet. It had reached the city, and the city was hungry for him. Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ignore them," she said gently. "This is about us, about what comes next, not them." Jack exhaled slowly, muscles relaxing just enough to let himself consider the offer. The weight of his past, the streets, the storms, the loneliness, they all pressed in, but beneath it, a strange, fragile hope began to form. Rex barked softly, as if confirming Jack's thoughts. Jack looked at Eleanor. He saw sincerity in her eyes. He saw determination. He saw someone who had been abandoned, yet had chosen to act, to trust, to reach out. And in that gaze, he recognized a choice he had avoided for too long. "All right," he said finally, voice low but firm. "I'll try, but on my terms, and Rex is coming." Eleanor's smile was quiet, victorious. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The shelter doors closed behind them, leaving the curious crowd outside. Jack felt the storm inside him begin to settle, replaced by a new current, a challenge, an opportunity, a risk he hadn't dared imagine. The streets had taught him survival. Now, Eleanor was offering him purpose. And for the first time, Jack Mercer realized that saving a life wasn't just an act of courage. It could be the beginning of something far greater. But somewhere, beyond the misty Chicago skyline, the ripple of the viral video continued to spread. Attention! media frenzy, and the eyes of a world unprepared for a homeless veteran to walk into the billionaire sphere were already closing in. Jack didn't know it yet, but the real storm was just beginning. The morning air was crisp, almost shockingly clear after the storm. The sun had begun to peek through the gray clouds, casting shafts of light across puddled streets. But for Jack Mercer, clarity didn't come with sunlight. He sat on the bench outside a small cafe, Rex lying at his feet, damp fur glistening in the light. The city moved around them, indifferent as ever, cars rushing past, pedestrians hustling with umbrellas, street vendors shouting over the din. But Jack felt like the center of a storm that wasn't weather. His phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications, emails, missed calls. Jack didn't recognize most of the numbers. Some were reporters, others strangers who had caught the viral footage of him saving Alina Whitmore, a billionaire bride, in the storm. He ignored them all. Attention was dangerous. Exposure was dangerous. Fame, even unintended, was a trap he knew too well. Rex nudged his hand, eyes bright and questioning. Jack gave the dog a tight squeeze. Even Rex seemed uneasy with the way the world was suddenly leaning toward them. Then came the first knock. Jack looked up to see a man in a tailored suit, rain still dripping from his shoulders, camera crews hovering in the distance. "Mr. Mercer?" the man asked. His tone was polite but commanding. "We've been asked to reach out on behalf of Ms. Whitmore. She wishes to speak with you." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I already met her," he muttered. "Yes, sir, but she would like a more formal conversation." Jack sighed. Formality wasn't his style. It had never been. He'd survived Afghanistan without it. He survived the streets without it. And yet here it was, pulling him back into a world he didn't understand. He glanced down at Rex. "You good with this?" The dog barked once, soft and affirming. Jack rubbed his ears, sighed again, and stood. When he arrived at Alina's penthouse, the scale of her world hit him all at once. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, walls gleaming with modern art, and floors so polished they reflected light like mirrors. Jack felt out of place. Every step echoed beneath his boots, reminding him that he was a visitor in someone else's universe. Alina waited in a simple, elegant chair near the window, calm but alert. Her hair was dry, clothes immaculate, yet she carried the same intensity Jack had seen the night before. Her eyes met his, unflinching. "Jack," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you properly." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "No need. I did what anyone would have done." Alina tilted her head, studying him. "No, most people wouldn't, not like you did." Jack exhaled, rubbing his face. "I'm not looking for praise." "I know," she said, her gaze softened, "and I'm not offering it, but I do want to offer something else." She gestured toward the papers on a glass table beside her. "A place to live, medical care for Rex, a job if you're willing, leading our veteran support initiatives. Real work, real purpose, not charity." Jack froze, scanning the documents. The thought of stability, of clean floors, warm food, a bed that didn't creak, was almost too much. Almost. He had survived on scraps, on adrenaline, on a dog's loyalty, and the idea of surrendering that independence was terrifying. "I don't do charity," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "This isn't charity," Alina replied. Her voice was firm. "It's an opportunity. You saved my life, Jack. I want to save yours. Not with money, not with titles, not with publicity, but with something that lasts. You've been invisible for too long. You deserve better." Jack's jaw tightened. He had survived because he refused help, because he learned early that trust was dangerous and dependence fatal. To accept her offer would mean surrendering part of that armor he had built over years. "I said no," he finally said, voice low but unwavering. Alina's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're serious?" Jack nodded. "I'm serious. I don't want your help, don't want your money, don't want your attention. I'm fine on my own." Alina's gaze didn't waver. Instead, she leaned back slightly, considering him carefully. "You think you're fine," she said slowly. You think the streets have taught you independence, but independence isn't just surviving, it's thriving, and you're capable of more than you realize. Jack's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend his life on the streets, but a strange vulnerability surfaced. Aliner's words were cutting through years of self-protection, and he hated how much it scared him. I can't accept it, he repeated, softer this time, almost pleading. I've survived this long without anyone. I can do it alone. Aliner's eyes softened. You've survived, yes, but survival isn't living, Jack. You've spent years hiding from the world. I'm asking you to step out of hiding. Not for me, not for money, not for recognition, but for you, for Rex, for the chance to matter to others too. Jack looked at Rex, who tilted his head, wet fur glistening in the sunlight streaming through the window. The dog had been his constant, his companion, his anchor. And Aliner had shown him a glimpse of something he hadn't felt in years, trust. He swallowed, voice tight. I don't know if I can do that. Aliner's expression was patient yet firm. You can, and you will, but not today, not forced. The choice is yours, Jack, always yours. All I ask is that you consider it. Jack nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. I'll think about it, he said. Good, she said softly, a smile flickering across her face. That's all I ask. Just then a commotion outside drew their attention. Jack's pulse spiked. Through the massive windows he saw cameras and microphones flashing, reporters and bystanders already swarming the building's entrance. Somehow, news of their meeting had leaked. The viral story had not only gone national, it had gone global. Jack's hands clenched. Attention, media, public scrutiny. He had survived countless dangers abroad, yet this felt like an ambush. Aliner's hand rested briefly on his arm. Ignore them, she whispered. They don't matter, not right now. This is about you and Rex. Jack took a deep breath, muscles relaxing slightly under her calm authority. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel, possibility. But the world outside didn't wait. Phone cameras flashed, drones hovered, social media exploded with hashtags and posts. #veteran saves billionaire Jack and Rex Chicago hero. The scrutiny was immediate, unrelenting. Jack felt the familiar tightness of danger closing in, yet he couldn't pull back, not completely. Aliner leaned closer. You saved me, she said, voice low. And now I want you to have a chance to save others. I won't force you, but I believe in you. Jack looked at her, at Rex, at the city spread below. The offer was terrifying. It was unprecedented. It was the one thing he had refused his entire life, trust in someone else, and a chance to step into a world he had avoided for years. He exhaled slowly. I'll think about it, he repeated, though this time the words carried something heavier, possibility. Not promise, not commitment, just thought. Aliner nodded. That's all I ask. The sunlight caught the glass skyscrapers across the city, reflecting shards of brilliance into the penthouse. Jack Mercer realized something terrifying and exhilarating. By saying yes, he could change his life. By saying no, he could continue surviving, but maybe never truly living. Rex barked softly, reminding him that no matter what, they were together. Jack's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to imagine stability, safety, and purpose. Then the world intruded again, media, social pressure, and the looming consequences of the viral video. Jack's fists clenched. The storm had passed outside, but inside, the real storm was just beginning. He would have to choose. But for now, he allowed himself one small, fragile thought. Perhaps survival wasn't enough anymore. Perhaps it was time to step out of hiding. Jack Mercer sat in the corner of Aliner Whitmore's sprawling penthouse, staring at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The sunlight reflected off glass towers, glittering shards dancing across the floor, but Jack didn't see the beauty. He saw a world that had never been made for someone like him, a world of wealth, expectation, and scrutiny. He could feel it pressing down, a weight heavier than any storm, heavier than any battlefield. Rex lay at his feet, head resting on Jack's boots, sensing the tension radiating off him. The dog's loyalty was constant, grounding him even when his mind raced. Jack had always trusted Rex. Alina, that was new, uncharted territory. Alina entered the room with a calm, purposeful stride. Her heels clicked softly on polished floors, but her presence carried more weight than sound. She moved with authority, yet with empathy, a strange combination Jack had never encountered. She held a folder, thick with documents, contracts, and proposals. "Jack," she said softly, almost gently, "I promised you an opportunity, not a trap, but it's time I make it clear what I'm asking." Jack's eyes narrowed. He had heard enough promises to know that words were often empty. "I'm listening," he muttered, voice tight. Alina set the folder on the table and opened it. The papers inside detailed a foundation she had been building in secret: veteran support programs, therapy dog initiatives, housing projects, and job training for those who had fallen through society's cracks. She looked at him, eyes steady. "I want you to lead it," she said, voice calm but unwavering. "Every decision, every program, every initiative, you and Rex will be at the center. You'll have resources, support, and freedom to create change. You'll have people to help you execute your vision. No bureaucracy, no interference. Just your experience, your instincts, your leadership." Jack's hands clenched, then relaxed. His mind raced. Leadership, responsibility, visibility. The words sounded like chains. He had spent years hiding, surviving without anyone noticing, living without attachments. This was exposure, commitment, accountability. Fear gripped him like cold iron. I don't know," he said, voice low, struggling to keep calm. "I've never run anything, never managed people, never lived in a world like this." Alina stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You've led men in war. You've survived conditions that would break most people. You know courage, strategy, and endurance better than anyone. This isn't a boardroom exercise. It's real work that saves lives, and you're already equipped for it." Jack's chest tightened. He felt the weight of her words, the gravity of the moment. She wasn't offering him money. She wasn't offering luxury. She was offering trust, a chance to matter, and it terrified him. "Why me?" he asked, almost bitterly. "Why not someone normal, someone qualified?" Alina's eyes softened. "Because you acted without hesitation. You didn't think about the money, the attention, the danger. You just did what was right. That shows character. That shows leadership. That shows courage. That's why you, Jack, not anyone else." Rex nudged Jack's hand, sensing his inner turmoil. The dog's eyes were steady, unwavering, faithful in a way humans rarely were. Jack looked down, scratching behind his ears, taking a deep breath. "I don't know if I can do it," he admitted, voice barely audible. I'm used to surviving, not leading." Alina smiled faintly. "You won't be leading alone. I'll be here. The foundation will support you. And Rex, well, he's already a leader in his own way." Jack let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's reassuring," he muttered. She leaned back, letting him breathe. The city hummed quietly below, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above it. For the first time in years, Jack felt the possibility of a future he had never allowed himself to imagine. Safe housing, stability, purpose, recognition for skill and bravery rather than misfortune. But fear clung to him like a second skin. Fear of failing, fear of exposure, fear of letting someone down, not Alina but the veterans who would depend on him. He had spent his life avoiding responsibility, surviving by controlling only what he could. Now he was being asked to risk everything on the unknown. "Jack," Alina said softly, breaking the silence, "I can't make this decision for you, but I believe in you. You have a chance to save more than one life now. Not just mine, not just Rex, but hundreds, maybe thousands. You can make a difference." Jack's hands tightened into fists. The offer was intoxicating, overwhelming, terrifying. His mind flashed with images of Rex, the veterans he had met on the streets, the children he had seen struggling in abandoned neighborhoods. What if he failed? What if he couldn't live up to the responsibility? What if the world chewed him up like it always had? He stood abruptly, packing the room. I don't know, he repeated. I don't know if I'm ready. I've never been this exposed before. I can't fail. Alina followed quietly, observing him without judgment. You won't know until you try, she said softly. But Jack, doing nothing is a failure too. You saved me. You risked your life last night. That was courage. Imagine if you applied that every day, not just once, not just in a storm. Jack stopped packing, staring out the window. Below, the city moved on, oblivious to the moral and emotional storm raging inside him. The viral video had made him a symbol, a reluctant hero, and now Alina was asking him to extend that courage beyond a single moment. Rex barked softly, nudging Jack's leg. Jack knelt, running a hand over the dog's head, grounding himself in the familiar. The thought came unbidden. Maybe courage wasn't about avoiding fear. Maybe it was about acting despite it. Alina's voice broke through his thoughts. I'm giving you the one thing no one has ever given you, a choice. You can walk away. You can continue surviving, or you can step into something bigger, something real, something that matters. Jack's jaw clenched. He thought of the cold streets, the nights filled with fear and hunger, the life of invisibility he had built like armor. To step into her world, into the spotlight, into responsibility, it was terrifying. But then he thought of Rex, the unwavering presence at his side. He thought of the bride in the storm, the look in her eyes when she had trusted him without question. He thought of the men and women on the streets who had no one to advocate for them. And for the first time, Jack realized that survival alone wasn't enough anymore. He exhaled slowly, voice low, deliberate. All right, he said finally. I'll do it, but on my terms, and Rex is coming with me. Alina's smile was quiet, triumphant, but not smug. I wouldn't have it any other way, she said softly. Jack felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. The unknown loomed ahead, a world of expectations, responsibility, and scrutiny. But for the first time in years, he felt alive in a way survival had never given him. The viral attention, the media, the public scrutiny, they could wait. Right now he had chosen to act. He had chosen trust. He had chosen purpose. And Jack Mercer knew, as he ran a hand over Rex's head, that stepping into the unknown was terrifying. But sometimes it was the only way to truly live. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. Inside, a homeless veteran and a billionaire had forged an alliance that could change everything. And the world, still watching, had no idea what was coming next. The city was alive with energy, the hum of traffic and chatter blending with the low roar of anticipation. Jack Mercer stood at the entrance of the newly opened Whitmore Veterans Foundation, Rex at his side, leash taut but calm. Sunlight streamed through the glass facade, illuminating polished floors and banners that read, Hope, Healing, Purpose. The building itself was a testament to Alina Whitmore's vision, but the real proof of it stood in Jack's eyes, steady, resolute, and alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. The foundation had been Alina's idea, but Jack had built it with his hands, instincts, and experience. Housing units, therapy dog programs, job training workshops, every detail bore his fingerprints. Today was the launch, the moment when years of struggle, courage, and unexpected friendship coalesced into something tangible. He glanced at Rex, who nudged his leg and let out a soft, approving bark. The dog had been his constant, his anchor, and today, a symbol of everything they had fought to survive. Jack, a familiar voice called. He turned to see Alina striding toward him, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Her hair was sleek, her eyes bright, and her smile calm but proud. I see you've already met everyone. Jack's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. They look motivated, he muttered. Alina laughed softly. They should be, and that's because of you, not me. You've built something real here. Jack shook his head, humility struggling against pride. I just didn't want anyone else to suffer the way I did, that's all. You did more than that, Alina said. She stepped closer, her gaze warm but intense. You saved lives before this foundation even opened, and now you're saving them every day. Jack's thoughts drifted back to the stormy night, to Alina in the wheelchair, to Rex leaping into the water, teeth gripping the strap like their lives depended on it, because they did. That night had changed everything. It had been a test of instinct, courage, and trust, and here they were, months later, witnessing the tangible results. The ceremony began with quiet speeches. Local media were present, but Alina had insisted on keeping it modest. She introduced Jack first. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, voice steady but warm, this foundation exists because of one man's courage. Not mine, not the board. His courage saved my life in a storm, and his vision has given countless veterans a new path. Jack Mercer. Jack's chest tightened. He had avoided attention his entire life. Cameras, microphones, flashing lights, they usually terrified him. But today was different. Today, the attention was not for wealth, for recognition, or for fame. It was for action, for courage, for purpose. Jack stepped forward. The applause was polite at first, then growing, filled with genuine respect. He nodded, voice low but clear. I don't know how to put this into words, he said. I've survived a lot, and sometimes it felt like nobody cared. But what matters is that we can make life better for the people who need it most. That's all I want. That's all I care about. Rex barked softly as if approving the speech. Jack rubbed his head, smiling faintly. Then Alina stepped beside him. Jack, she said softly, you changed my life. You didn't know who I was, and you still risked everything to save me. I want you to know that you've given me more than I can ever repay. Jack shook his head, almost embarrassed. You don't owe me anything, he said. Alina's smile softened into something rare, something personal. Maybe not in the way most people think, but you've given hope, not just to me, not just to Rex, not just to yourself, but to every veteran who will walk through these doors. You've given them someone who understands, someone who cares. Jack swallowed hard. He had spent years feeling invisible, discarded, unimportant. But here, in the warmth of Alina's gratitude, in the quiet awe of the veterans who looked at him with respect and hope, he felt seen, truly seen. The ceremony continued, speeches flowing, cameras capturing moments of handshakes, smiles, and the occasional tear. Yet Jack's mind kept drifting back to that night, the rain, the street, the wheelchair teetering on the edge. That moment had defined a turning point in both their lives. Without it, none of this would exist. Without it, he might still be wandering the streets, invisible. Alina approached again, handing him a small folder. We finalized the contracts, she said, voice steady. You're officially the director. Full autonomy, full support. The foundation is yours to shape. No interference, just resources and trust. Jack opened the folder slowly. Legal documents, organizational plans, and letters of support filled the pages. He ran a hand over them, feeling the weight of responsibility, the pull of fear, and the thrill of possibility all at once. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Say nothing, Alina said softly. Just do, that's all I ask. Jack looked at Rex, then back at Alina. The dog's eyes reflected loyalty and trust, the kind he had rarely received from humans. Alina's gaze reflected gratitude and belief, the kind he had never dared to expect. And in that moment, he understood something profound. Survival had been his life, but purpose would be his legacy. The crowd outside had grown. Local reporters, social media influencers, curious passers-by, they all wanted a glimpse, a soundbite, a photograph of the man who had saved a billionaire bride, and then turned that courage into something far greater. Jack stepped to the window and looked out over the city. The streets below were alive with movement, stories unfolding, struggles continuing, lives being lived. And he knew that somewhere out there were veterans who would soon walk through these doors, find guidance, and discover hope they thought they had lost. Alina stood beside him, hand brushing against his lightly. "You did more than save me," she whispered. "You've saved a lot more than you realize." Jack exhaled, feeling the tightness in his chest ease. "I guess I'm finally living," he said softly. Alina smiled. "Yes, you are." And in that moment, the rain-soaked streets of Chicago, the viral video, the storm, and the fear, they all felt like a lifetime ago. Jack Mercer had stepped out of hiding, out of survival, and into a world that he could shape. A world where courage, loyalty, and love, embodied in him and Rex, could create change, lasting change. The ceremony concluded. Veterans shook his hand, thanked him, smiled at him with hope and respect. Reporters took photos, cameras flashing. Social media buzzed. But Jack didn't flinch. He had chosen this path. The attention no longer frightened him. Later, alone with Alina and Rex, he allowed himself a small laugh. "I still can't believe all of this, because of one night in the rain." Alina's smile was quiet but proud. That night was the beginning, but this is the result. Rex barked, tail wagging. Jack knelt, hugging him tight. The dog licked his cheek, reminding him that no matter what world they entered, they would always have each other. Jack looked out the window one last time as the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the city. A homeless veteran had saved a billionaire, and in doing so had discovered something he never imagined. A new world, a new purpose, and a life worth living. And Alina Whitmore, once a bride teetering on the edge of disaster, had found not just a savior, but a partner in courage, trust, and change. Together they would face the challenges ahead. Together they had already transformed lives. And for Jack Mercer, Rex at his side, the storm had finally passed. But the world was watching, and now it would never forget him.